and I'm excited to go over this week's psalm with you all. So today we're looking at Psalm 147, and this is a beautiful psalm, but sometimes reading psalms like this can be a little challenging because there's some language in here that relates to ideas that we don't think about today, that are not part of our world experience. So let me give you an example of that. In verse 13, he says, "For he, the Lord, strengthens the bars of your gates and blesses your people within you. He grants peace to your borders." So gates, borders makes sense, although maybe not in quite the same way that we think of it today. We tend to think now when we're talking about borders more about immigration, or like the idea of infiltration, rather than about a stable place of control. We just don't tend to have, at least especially not here in the States, we don't really experience territorial disputes about who owns which piece of land or how much land is owned, and we don't have military conflicts about that kind of thing. For a large portion of the world, we all kind of use the same maps, and so the boundaries of places are fairly well established. Now, there was in recent memory a case where this was not as clearly defined. In Eastern Europe, there was a conflict where Russia wanted, part of that, and that was not too long ago. But that's kind of the exception rather than the rule. But for the ancient world, it was common to have disputes about who owned territory because people tend to define themselves by where they lived and sort of the community that they were a part of. And so what that meant was that you would have these fringes because a territory was essentially kind of the area that a ruler could maintain. And so it depended on military might and that kind of thing. And so you'd have these places at the edge of your territory, or the edge of a king's territory, where it wasn't clear. You were as close to this king as you were to that king, and neither one of them really was involved in your life because you were so far away. And so it was kind of whoever showed up with a big enough army to demand your taxes was the one who kind of was in charge of you. And you were left with this kind of bizarre situation. And the solution to that was to secure your borders, to have kind of use stones, that kind of thing, to mark the edges, but then to have your military able to mobilize and kind of mark out the edge of your territory and keep it clearly under your control. And so this idea of granting peace at your borders is the absence of that conflict, that kind of like edge of uncertainty where the other side thinks it should be theirs and you think it should be yours, and there's this like ongoing conflict to see who's in control. Now, gates are another thing that we don't really think about today. Walls around our cities and gates. That's just not something that we use anymore. We don't mark our towns by walls because we don't need them to keep safe anymore. But in the ancient world, the wall was a place of safety, and the idea was essentially this: cities could only support so many people, and the amount of people they could support was dependent on how much farmland was nearby. So today, because of improvements in our agricultural ability, because of the ability to transport and especially cold storage food, you can have a thriving community in a place where they can't produce much of their own food, or where they're missing some essential staple of food, because they can transport the food in, and that's not an issue. In the ancient world, that wasn't the case. For a city to thrive, there had to be enough farmland nearby to supply it. And so the more viable farmland, the bigger the city. But still, a city was a contained urban center, and farmland would spread out around it. But what that meant was, in the event of a military conflict, the city would become much more full. That is, all of the people from the surrounding farming communities could flock to the city and find shelter there, but only if the city was defensible, which meant it had walls and strong gates. And so this kind of language talks about that. Now, this seems so distant from our own time, but essentially, all that he's saying is he recognizes that the security, the peace, the prosperity of his community, both his local community, his city, or his town, or his village, as well as the nation as a whole, only comes from the providence of God. And that is something that we can very much relate to. The security of our town, the security of Angola, the security of Indiana, the security of the United States, comes only from the providence of God. Now he moves on, he talks about the immense power of God, but then he reflects on how all of these things are softened. The hardness of like the falling wool, of the falling snow rather, and the freezing of frost, and the falling of hail, this icy wind that seems so harsh and powerful that is his to command, yet it is melted and softened by his word. And he reaches this final revelation. He has revealed his word to Jacob, his laws and decrees to Israel. He has done this for no other nation. And all of the provision, all the goodness that God has given them, one singular, most powerful, most significant is this, his word. And now, for us, this has a double meaning. For he has given his word, as in his laws, as in his written word. But he has also given us the Word, who was with him from the beginning, who was involved in all of creation. And he has done this for no one else. Now I have to be careful again how I say this, because this is a gift for everyone. But like ancient Israel, who was given a gift for the sake of the whole world, but it was a unique gift for the covenant people, Israel. So too, Christ was sacrificed on behalf of the entire world, but those who benefit from it are the covenant people. That is, the church, those who have surrendered themselves to the rule and reign of God. And so here we have this unique provision, unlike any other, the sacrifice and life of Christ. And it is a revelation. In fact, Paul talks about how Christ was revealed at the right time. It is a revelation, just like the word, the giving of the law, was a revelation to Israel. And it is a unique revelation that allows us to understand God in a way that others cannot. It is a unique revelation that allows us to please God in a way that others cannot. Paul himself says, this is the writer of the Hebrews, if anyone would please God, he must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. And so, today, as we reflect on this psalm, as we read this, realize that we have a powerful revelation here, that this book is a revelation of the character, of the life of God, of the work of God, but that the truest, most powerful revelation we have of who God is in the Word, his Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you. Go in peace.